This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Shus, my Rabbi, Rav Glatstein. I'm just starting now, so I think... April 19th, 1943. There are only 3 Rabbanim left in the Warsaw Ghetto. 3 Goinei Olam. Rav Shimshon Stockhammer, Rav Menachem Zemba, and Rav David Kahana Shapiro. The last 3 Rabbanim left in the Warsaw Ghetto. And these 3 Rabbanim now convene for what is perhaps the most frightful decision in recent Jewish history. And they are given 60 minutes to make the decision. They had just received the word from the Judenrat that the Catholic Church of Warsaw had given permission for these 3 Goinim to escape the ghetto, and they were being given safe haven. Their lives were going to be spared, and they needed to make a decision within the next 60 minutes. Just sort of to paint the picture of what life was like in the ghetto during these deplorable days, we have a first-hand eyewitness account of the wretched situation. I read to you an article that my grandfather wrote in a book entitled Theological and Halachic Reflections on the Holocaust. My grandfather writes, Ani hagever ro ani b'shevet avrasoi. I am the man that has seen the afflictions of my people. I am the victim, and I am the witness. I saw the Warsaw Ghetto, littered with corpses, their faces distorted, swollen eyes, skulls crushed, and blood flowing everywhere. The blood of our brothers and sisters, the blood of our parents, the blood of our children. No imagination, no matter how daring, could possibly conceive of anything we've lived through. About a year earlier, my great-grandfather, the Sakhachev Rav, the last Rav of the city of Sakhachev, was taken to the Warsaw Ghetto with all of his children, my grandmother included. The first moment that they got there, the Gestapo knocked on the door. They took away their oldest son, Shmuel Hirsch. We had a Hakamas Matseva for my grandmother in the beginning of the year. We made a memorial for her sibling, Shmuel Hirsch. They never saw him again. So this is the horror and the dread that they experienced in the Warsaw Ghetto in the final days of the ghetto. And if we could say such a thing, to make matters worse, this was April 19th, April 20th was the Führer's birthday, was Hitler Yamach Shemoy's birthday. And the chief executioner, Himmler, decided to present Hitler with a birthday present that he was going to annihilate and obliterate the ghetto in 24 hours. And here you have Reb Shimon Stockhammer, Reb Menachem Zemba, Reb David Kahana Shapiro, 3 Goinei Olam, and they're presiding. What should they do? Should they escape, or should they stay with the people? People were streaming into Reb Menachem Zemba's house. My grandfather was in his house. People were coming with all kinds of problems that nobody should ever know of. Reb Menachem Zemba was a world-renowned Talmid Chacham, Goin Oila, master of Chasidus. Just to give you a picture, Reb Menachem Zemba, already in the 1930s, was offered the position to be chief rabbi of Jerusalem. When Reb Meir Shapiro passed away, they offered the job of Rosh Hashiva of Chachmei Lublin to Reb Menachem Zemba. He's not even in his 40s. He's the official honorary secretary of the Moyetzes Gedolei HaTorah. And at the 3rd Knessia, he was the main speaker for Klal Yisrael at the Knessia Gedolah. He had written more than 10,000 pages of Chidushei Torah. Kemat all of them were destroyed. My grandfather told me he was a ben bayis by Reb Menachem Zemba. He was in his house Kemat every day. That behind his chair in the dining room was situated a Svarim shrank with no Svarim in it, full of Kisvei Yad of Reb Menachem Zemba. So he had an entire commentary on the Rambam called Machazeh HaMelech, which unfortunately we don't have. He wrote an entire parish on the Yerushalmi called Menachem Yerushalayim, also destroyed. Tens of thousands of tshuvas, perushim on Medrash, and the entire Shas. And tragic scenes were taking place in the home of Rabbi Menachem Zemba. You had couples who came in to ask advice. You had a couple who was able to rescue themselves, and the husband wanted to go, and the wife was scared. The wife was nervous. She had a Jewish face. She was afraid she would be caught. She had elderly parents in the ghetto. And so to speak against their will, they figured they have to get divorced. And they came in crying, and B'demai Shalish Rabbi Menachem Zemba presided over these gittin. The Mizbeach, they say, at that moment was Yoreh Demais with Rabbi Menachem Zemba and these couples. This was the atmosphere of the Warsaw Ghetto, April 19th, 1943. What should these Rabbanim decide? Should they save their own skin or should they stay with the people? And you understand of what value, what could these Rabbanim contribute to their brethren in the Warsaw Ghetto? The entire ghetto was about to be firebombed. The Nazis came, poured gasoline on every home, and systematically bombed house by house by house. The house would burst into flames. The Yidden would run out. They would be shot immediately. And this was certainly Dinei Nefashos, and as such, Paischin B'Katan. The youngest among the Rabbanim in Warsaw was Rav David Kahana Shapiro. We have a record of his psak. Rav David Kahana Shapiro declared from the depths of his soul, although I'm the youngest and my words are not binding on you, and we know we can't do anything to help the people, but staying with them and not abandoning them, it encourages them, it strengthens them. How can we leave them at a moment like this? I don't have the stamina, I don't have the strength, I can't do it to them. To leave these Yidden, could we hide from the Ribbono Shel Olam? The Ribbono Shel Olam that's outside of the ghettos, the Ribbono Shel Olam inside of the ghetto? I can't leave. And Rav Stockhammer and Rav Menachem Zemba looked him in the eye, and they couldn't say a word. They were astonished. Rav Menachem Zemba gives a clap on the bima, case closed. There's nothing more we could say. Rav Menachem Zemba personally went to the Judenrat. He said, we will remain, and if we need to die with the Warsaw Jews, then that's the will of God. I heard this story right after last Tisha B'Av from Rabbi Chanan Zon, head of the Chevra Kadisha. He has a very strong family connection to Rav David Kahana Shapiro, and he mentioned to me that this psak of these three Gaonim, it's impossible to fully comprehend. What were they really adding to the Yidden in the ghetto? What was their contribution? What type of encouragement were they able to give? The ghetto was going to be obliterated within 24 hours. What about Chayecha Koidem v'Chei Achicha Imach? And it's a historical fact that many Admoirim and many Rosh Yeshiva, when presented the opportunity to save their own skin, they did so. While thousands and tens of thousands of their Hasidim and Talmidim went to the gas chambers and the crematoria. But yet these Gedolim who left and saved their lives were able to rebuild their yeshivas, their Hasidusim. And we could say that the continuity of Klal Yisrael today, to a large part, is due to the fact that these Gedolim, when presented the opportunity to save their lives, they did so to rebuild for the future. I'm not going to mention any names, only names that are already documented in the Sfarim. In the Zichron Shmuel, Chedushim Rav Shmuel Rozovsky, page Tavkuf Ayin Aleph, he writes about the Panovich Rav. How many Rabbanei Elita survived the Holocaust? Zero. One exception, the Panovich Rav. Panovich Rav wasn't there. Says Rav Shmuel Rozovsky, in 1941, the Jews of Panovich were rounded up. They were taken to the forest and murdered en masse. Rav Shlomo Kahaneman was in Palestine en route to America to fundraise. His Rebbetzin was killed, his children were killed, he had one surviving son. At the Hakamas Matseva of the Panovich Rav, Rav Shmuel Rozovsky said that the entire life of Rav Kahneman, his soul was tormented and plagued. His soul had no respite. And he was always bothered and disturbed. I saved myself, but I couldn't save the community. Says Reb Shmuel Rozovsky, all of the efforts and all of the toil and all the fundraising of the Panovich Rav was all hakol l'matara achas shelo yehu bebechinas hitzalti es atzmi vesfinasi lo hitzalti. Says Rav Shmuel Rozovsky, the reason the Panovich Rav was able to accomplish so much, he envisioned himself in that forest being shot and emerging just for one purpose. Many Rabbanim, many Rebbes, however, when faced with this challenge of to stay with the community or to save their own lives, they heroically and courageously were loyal to the Kehillah. Rav Shmuel Shlomo Leiner, the Radzina Rebbe, was offered safe passage to Warsaw. But he displayed extraordinary courage. He stayed behind to help the other Jews. When the Gestapo, they felt that his presence was encouraging his brethren, they ordered that he present himself, otherwise the entire ghetto would be killed. And the Radzina Rebbe courageously and calmly said goodbye to his wife and presented himself to the Nazis. He was brutally beaten and ultimately gassed in Sobibor in 1942. The Biana Rebbe of Krakow, president of Yeshiva Chachmei Lublin, he was given a South American passport. He wouldn't leave. He stayed in the ghetto. By September of 43, the ghetto was Judenrein. The ghetto, together with the Rebbe, everyone was killed. People don't realize the extent of the tentacles of the Nazis. They cover the entire European continent. There is a Rav in Croatia, Rabbi Charles W. Steckel, chief rabbi of Slavania. He gets a 2-word telegram from the former chief rabbi, Barach lecha, get out of here. And that's what he told the people, Barach lecha. But he didn't leave. 1940, he's still there. He had two opportunities to escape, and he didn't take advantage. He writes in his book, by the way, he ultimately survived, that he felt it was his moral duty to be with his congregation. Rabbi Riccardo Pacifici, chief rabbi of Genoa, Italy. He refused the opportunity to flee the city. He was gassed in Auschwitz, 1943. Kehilos were not always very kind to the Rabbanim who forsook them in their time of Tsar. Not going to mention the name, but it's a historical fact. Chief Rabbi of Rome in the early 40s was given word by the Catholic Church that he would have safe haven in the church, and he took advantage of it. He saved his life. He comes back in 1945 into the shul expecting his stellar back, expecting to continue to serve as chief rabbi. They said, Rabbi, you left us in our time of need. Now you come back to us. They rejected him. A dejected chief rabbi of Rome, it's a source of great anguish in Jewish history, famously converted to Christianity. By the way, in a twist of history, recently, his granddaughter converted back to Judaism. There was a Rav in Lita, the Rav of Isishak, of Shmuel Rozowski, Shimon Rozowski. His family was visiting from Palestine, 1939. His son Uri says, you can't stay in Poland. Come. A shepherd must remain with his flock, he said. Now they need me more than ever. Many Gedolim demonstrated supernatural loyalty to their kehillos, to their yeshivos. It's well known. Where was Rebbe Chanon in 1939? Right here, New York City. He was fundraising for Baranovich. The administration in Yeshiva Torah Vadas tells Rabbi Chanan, stay here. What am I going to do here? Rosh Shlomo Hyman told him, I will step down, you're going to be the Rosh Yeshiva of Torah Vadas. Rabbi Chanan said, what will I do with my Talmidim? Rabbi Gedalia Shor said, I'll get them visas. He says, I can't leave my 400 children back in Baranovich. He's flying back, he comes back, he heads back via London. His supporters in London say, you can't go back to Poland. Rabbi Chanan said, a captain, it's printed in the Ikvasa de Mashiach, a captain does not abandon their ship. And I'm very proud to say, and for our family it's a source of great pain as well, that my great-grandfather, the last Rav of the city of Sachachav, was offered by the Agudas Yisrael, a very prestigious Rabbanus in America, to save his life, which he refused. He was Moiser Nefesh al Kiddush Hashem and ultimately killed in the Warsaw Ghetto. Hashem Yimkam Damai. And this is the fateful decision that these three Rabbanim had to make. Reb Menachem Zemba, Reb Shimshon Stackhammer, and Reb David Kahana Shapiro, and they chose to stay. What is so fascinating about this dilemma is one would think that a shaila like this would have some precedent in more ancient Jewish history, and incredibly, on Thursday I discovered that if you look in Chidushei Chsam Sofer Masechta Chulin on Daf Mem Vav, the Chsam Sofer alludes to the fact that elsewhere in his writings he discusses this shaila at length. In the Drashos Chsam Sofer for Ches Tammuz, page Shin Hey, the Drashos Chsam Sofer gave in 1809, he writes that 60 years earlier, in the city of Prague, when Prague was in siege, none other than the Noid Yehuda was the Rav of Prague. And the Noid Yehuda paskin that when the city is B'tzara, the Rav needs to leave. Says the Chsam Sofer, the Noid Yehuda was right. But the Manhige Kahal Prague disagreed with the Noid Yehuda, and they made him stay. Says the Chsam Sofer, why did they do that? They did it for themselves. Almost selfishly. They demanded that the Noid Yehuda stay so that he should be a zechus, that they should be protected. They held the leader must act with abandonment for his own personal welfare and not just save their own skin. But says the Chsam Sofer, many Kehilos disagreed with the Kehillah of Prague. Says the Chsam Sofer, when the community of Mainz was in siege, they sent the Gadol Reb Chaim Hirsch to Frankfurt. When the community of Koblenz was in siege, they sent Reb Dziskin Gundrish to safety. And when my Rebbe, the Hafla, was in Frankfurt, the Hafla paskined he should leave, and they agreed with him. And he left. Says the Chsam Sofer, why should the Kehillah have the additional worrying about their Rav? Says the Chsam Sofer, if the Rav leaves, he could daven for the people, b'menuchas hanefesh, his tefillos will be more accepted. Says the Chsam Sofer, it's a skula if the people let the Rav leave. It's a pasuk in Chumash. Which pasuk? Says the Chsam Sofer, Vayehi bin Soyah ha'oroim. When the Oroin travels, when the Talmid Chacham is in Goros, when the Gadol is in Goros, the Rebbeinu Shalom says, Kuma Hashem v'yafutzu oyevecha. That the Rebbeinu Shalom says, will now scatter the enemy. What's the upshot? Ha'olam izeh ki yesh kan machloikes ben hanhagas kehal kodesh Prague lehanhagas kehal kodesh Frankfurt. That this dilemma that Reb Shimshon Stackhammer and Reb Menachem Zemba and Reb David Kahana Shapiro were convening over is an age-old machlokes that dates back to the Noid Yehuda and the Hafla. Legend has it that when the Chazon Ish was posed with the question, when Gedolim asked him in the 40s, Chazon Ish was already in Bnei Brak, should we leave? Should we save our lives to rebuild the yeshivos, or should we stay with the people? Chazon Ish avoided giving a direct answer. Instead, he said, check out the Chsam Sofer and the Drashos. But the Chsam Sofer doesn't give a definitive answer. Presumably what the Chazon Ish meant was that there is no definitive answer, Every circumstance has to be weighed individually. But the Chassam Sofer continues. Amazingly, says the Chassam Sofer, the dilemma and the machloikis between the Kahal of Frankfurt and the Kahal of Prague actually will account for a historical discrepancy between the first Beis HaMikdash and the second Beis HaMikdash. Says the Chassam Sofer, you ever wonder what day on the calendar were the walls of Yerushalayim breached in the time of the second Beis HaMikdash? Shivasa B'Tammuz. And we know exactly that it was Shivasa B'Tammuz. And there's no kilkul cheshbonos, and there's no question, and there's no doubt. And yet when it comes to Churban Bayis Rishon, the Gemara says the walls were breached on the 17th. But the pasuk in Yirmiyah says it was breached on the 9th. How do we reconcile the pasuk with the Gemara? Says Yerushalmi in Rosh Hashanah, kilkul cheshbonos hayusham. They got the date wrong. There was a confusion. Tosfos in Rosh Hashanah explains that they knew what date it was, but in order to preserve the turmoil of the times, they intentionally wrote the incorrect date to give us the feeling of confusion that was occurring. Ask the Chassam Sofer, it's a pella. By Churban Bayis Rishon, they didn't know the date, and Churban Bayis Sheni, they did know the date. Why did they have so much more clarity in the time of the second Beis HaMikdash than they had in the times of the first Beis HaMikdash? How do we explain this, just historically? Says the Chassam Sofer very simply. Who was the Gadol Hador in the times of the second Beis HaMikdash? Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Who formulated Shivasa B'Tammuz? Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai by Bayis Sheni. And where was Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai? He held like the Hafla, and he held like the Noid Yehuda, that when the city is in siege, and the Gadol could escape, the Gadol needs to escape to preserve Yavne v'Chachamea. He held like the Hafla. So he holds like the Hafla. So while the people are in turmoil, the Gadol who is legislating Shivasa B'Tammuz has Menuchas HaNefesh. So there's no confusion. Mashein Kain Bayis Rishon, who's the Gadol Hador? Yirmiyah. Where's Yirmiyah? He's in prison. Yirmiyah had the same confusion the people had. Hence the Kilkul Cheshbonos by Bayis Rishon. And then the Chassam Sofer continues. Says the Chassam Sofer, the debate between the Chachmei Prague and the Chachmei Frankfurt, which was a question by Churban Bayis Rishon and Churban Bayis Sheni, in my opinion, says the Chassam Sofer, is a machloikis b'chazal. We'll try to do this quickly. It's a little bit of a pilpul. Say it briefly. Chassam Sofer quotes the Gemara. The Gemara says, Reb Chia bar Abba was ill. Al legabe Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan comes to greet him. Amar le chavivin alacha yisurin. Rabbi Yochanan says, no, you like the punishment? Rabbi Chia bar Abba said, no thanks. Lo hein v'lo yischaran. Amar le havli yadach. He says, give me your hand. Havli yadach. V'yukmei Rabbi Yochanan schlepped Rabbi Chia bar Abba out of his yisurim. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Yochanan chalash. Al legabe Rabbi Chanina. He says, Rabbi, you like the yisurim? He says, Lo hein v'lo yischaran. Amar le havli yadcha. Give me your hand. And Rabbi Chanina schlepped Rabbi Yochanan out of his yisurim. Ask the Gemara the $1 million question. Amai, lukim Rabbi Yochanan lenafshe. If Rabbi Yochanan could schlep out Rabbi Chia bar Abba, why can't he schlep himself out? Says the Gemara, Amri, ein chavosh mater atzmei beso yisurim. Says the Chassam Sofer, this Gemara is a raya to the community of Frankfurt, and to the Hafla, and to the Noid Yehuda. Because if the Gadol is going to stay in the city, and the Midas Hadin is going to be on him as well, then the Gadol trying to daven for the people is going to be begeder in chavosh mater atzmei beso yisurim. And therefore, says the Chassam Sofer, what this Gemara seems to indicate is that the Gadol needs to leave the city so that the Gadol could schlep the people out of the yisurim, like Rabbi Yochanan schlepped out Rabbi Chia bar Abba. But if the Gadol is going to be in the city, it's going to be like Rabbi Yochanan who's helpless. But says the Chassam Sofer, the community of Prague also has a leg to stand on. And that's the Chazal about Yishmael. Only the Chassam Sofer could see what to do in a particular circumstance by analyzing a chazal that everybody knows. Yishmael was dying of thirst. Yishmael davened for himself. Hagar davened for him. Says the Torah, Ki shama Elokim al kol anar b'asher hu sham. Now why is Rebbe Shalom listening to Yishmael's tefillah, but Yishmael is b'veis ha'isurim? Hagar is not. Is a raya that when a person is b'tzar, their tefillahs are more makubal. From this chazal it would seem, says the Chassam Sofer, like the community of Prague, that the Gadol needs to stay with the people so that he should also be b'tzar, and then his tefillos will be more neskabel. Says the Chassam Sofer, chas v'sholem, for me to be machriya, machloikes, between Chachmei Frankfurt and Chachmei Prague, between Bayis Rishon and Bayis Sheni. But in my humble opinion, there's only one way to reconcile these two divrei Chazal, and that is Hani mili b'Yisrael v'Hani mili b'Akum. Says the Chassam Sofer, how is it possible that if somebody is ill, if somebody is sick, that someone else could daven for them? The Rebbe Shalom was goizer that they should have an oynish. Why is Yenam's tefillah going to help for somebody else? Does Rebbe Shalom take shoichad? This was the gezeira. Says the Chassam Sofer, the only way tefillah could help for another person is because when it comes to Yidden, we're all one entity, we're all one unit, provided, though, that we genuinely could feel the pain of the other person. Says the Gemara, HaMisparel al chaveroi tzarich sheyech le'atzmai alav. You better feel for somebody when you daven for them if you want it to work. Says the Chassam Sofer, by Yidden, where somebody else could daven for you, then it's better for the Gadol to leave the city. Because if he's going to be in the city, ein chavash mater atzmai mibeis ha'isurim. But when it comes to Akum, where somebody can't really daven for someone else, so by Hagar, the Rebbe Shalom listened to Yishmael's tefillah. Frighteningly, it would seem that the conclusion of the Chassam Sofer is that he's noited to follow the psak of his Rabbi, the Hafla, and the Manhigei Frankfurt, that when the Gadol is b'tzar with the people, if he could save his life, he should save his life. You could take a look in the Chassam Sofer, page Shinhei. But as we mentioned, many Gedolim felt otherwise. Rav Menachem Zemba, Rav Shimon Stockhammer, Rav David Kahner Shapiro, they paskin, they need to go down with the people. And Rav Zon, who told me over this story, was expressing that it's so difficult to understand what value, what contribution did these Gedolim feel they could be making to the people, staying together with the people. The truth is, and this is a point of great halachic and historical controversy, and I never spoke about this before, what was Rabbi Menachem Zemba's shita regarding the Warsaw Ghetto uprising? I can only tell you what my grandfather told me. He was there in Rabbi Menachem Zemba's house. We have a record that Rabbi Menachem Zemba emphatically and repeatedly gave sanction to the Warsaw Ghetto uprising. He held it was Kiddush Hashem. So the record goes, says Rabbi Menachem Zemba, Umitamzeh ani roya shelafi hahalocha mitzvahs hamered b'meitav tachsisei hamolchama Kiddush Hashem yeshkan milchemes mitzvahi. My grandfather was a lookout during the Warsaw Ghetto uprising. He had excellent vision. He never wore glasses. When he turned 100, he said the hardest part about being 100 is the Rashi Oisiyos are a little bit more difficult to see. There's another record that Rabbi Menachem Zemba said, I speak to you from the depths of my conscience, and I warn you, there's only one way for Yidden now, and that is to revolt, to resist. It's a Kiddush Hashem. We can't die like sheep. Radzina Rebbe, we mentioned him before. Radzina Rebbe also concurred. Not only that, he instructed all the Radzina Hasidim to join the partisans in the forest. He made a tainus in Lublin. The Nazis learned about the rebellion. They said if either the Rebbe turns himself in or we annihilate and burn down the forest. The Gabbai, loyal to the Rebbe, did not tell the Radzina Rebbe. The Gabbai dresses up like the Radzina Rebbe, presents himself to the Nazis, and he's killed instantaneously. A little while later, the Nazis realized what happened, and finally they gave the ultimatum to the Radzina Rebbe. And the last dying words of the Radzina Rebbe was revolt, never surrender to evil, and he said Shema Yisrael. Rav Tzvi Hersh Meisel, Shal Sechuvas Mekadshe Hashem, concurred with the uprising. There was a Reb Zemmelman. He smuggled himself out of the ghetto. He dressed up like a German. He got a hold of weapons, smuggled them back into the Warsaw ghetto, trained the youth in the resistance. The ghetto was supposed to be obliterated on Hitler's birthday, April 20th. My grandfather writes, the Warsaw Jews carried out the uprising for 6 weeks in a holdout without parallel in history. Never in the sad and holy annals of the Jews' will to survive for his faith has a more desperately glorious stand been made than by those heroes who fought not only for their lives but for the dignity of Klal Yisrael. They fought like mythological lions, without arms, without help, and without hope. We mentioned one of these Goinim, Rav Shimshon Stockhammer. It's kedai to speak what happened to him. He survived the Warsaw Ghetto. He was taken to a labor camp near Lublin. He lost his entire family. With great Mesiras Nefesh, Pesach 1943, Rav Stockhammer baked matzahs. He's smuggling the matzahs out on his back together with a certain doctor. They were caught. He was beaten ruthlessly. 12 months later, Pesach 1945, and now you know liberation is just around the corner. Rav Stockhammer was taken to another camp, and he gave a drasha, and he announced publicly that he will not be eating chametz for 8 days. They said, Rabbi, that means you're not going to be eating for 8 days. You can't do that. You can't give up your life. There's no v'chaya. It's not one of the 3 cardinal sins. Says Rav Stockhammer, I know the halacha. But there are 2,500 Yidden in this camp. Somebody needs to remind us that there's a Torah, and there's a Pesach, and there's an Isser Chametz, and that's me. I've been makabel this upon myself, b'simcha. L'malo min hateva, he was kamat a walking corpse at the time. Ill, broken, sick, he did not eat for 8 days. At the end of Pesach, the entire camp was rounded up on the cattle cars. The American army was coming. The cattle cars were bombed. The Rav was critically wounded. Reb Shimon Stockhammer was Nifter Yud Gimel ER 1945, 3 days before liberation. And Rabbi Zon told me that he never fully understood the psak of these 3 Gedolim until he heard last Tisha B'Av an account that my grandfather writes about what those nights were in the Warsaw Ghetto. My grandfather writes, we were hauled to the forced labor camp in Bedzin. We labored in the most brutal conditions, early morning darkness, freezing temperatures. What provided us the secret, mysterious strength and endurance to continue breathing? Lulei sayroscha sha'ashua yazavadati ba'ani. If not for the torch of Torah that aided me, I would have succumbed to my sufferings. On those abysmal nights, we stood together with the great Rabbanim of Warsaw, Reb David Kahana Shapiro, Reb Shimon Stockhammer, and other Goinim who were able to say over Gemara's Baal Peh throughout the night. B'machashakim hoishivani ze Talmud Bavli. During the dark, Golos nights, the Gemara that these precious Rabbanim remembered and recited by heart was an eternal light to illuminate the hopeless, downtrodden situation and give us hope for a brighter future. Rabbi Zon told me he finally understood this psak that he heard so many years earlier. that these Gedolim somehow understood that being together with the people, not only their presence, not only their moral support, but even under these circumstances, the Torah that they were able to recite Baal Peh in the most trying situations would somehow breathe life into these Yidden. My grandfather said he was able to survive the war because of the courageous decision of Reb Menachem Zemba, and Reb David Kahana Shapiro, and Reb Shimon Stockhammer. And then perhaps it would not be an overstatement to say that if not for that decision of Das Torah 74 years ago, I too would not be here today. So to give a definitive halacha, what should the gadol do? What should the leader do? That's a call only the Gedolei Yisrael could make. But perhaps what we could say is Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim chayim. That to a large degree, Klal Yisrael today has been revived and resuscitated and resurrected through the Gedolim and the Admorim who were able to escape and save their lives and rebuild their yeshivas and rebuild their chasidus. But we may equally say that Klal Yisrael has been rebuilt upon the legacy of Mesiras Nefesh, of these great souls, of these true Manhigei Yisrael, who with abandonment for their own personal welfare, Hashlech Nafsha Mineged, and to be with the people and to inspire the people and to resuscitate the people and give them a brighter future. Klal Yisrael to this day basks in the glory of these giants of spirit. A few months ago, my brother Ari discovered that in the archive in Yad Vashem, there was a manuscript that my grandfather submitted 65 years ago describing the death march he was on before liberation. This is April 1945. He was liberated on Lag BaOmer, 1945. The name of this document is called the March from Hassenthal. There were 700 prisoners on the march. 200 were deathly ill with typhus. My grandfather writes, we were sleepy, we were deadly tired, wild from hunger, chased over the ice, and if you didn't move fast, the bullets relieved you of the march. And people were dropping left and right. And all you could hear was, now I bid farewell, Shema Yisrael, if only I was in Eretz Yisrael, will I ever have Kvuras Yisrael? Who will say Kaddish after me? But there was no turning around, and there was no grieving, and there was no Kaddish. The night was still very long, the journey still very far, and the bullets in abundance. The Navi Yechezkel, we all know, saw a prophecy about the dry bones. And the Gemara Sanhedrin describes and discusses who were the dry bones in the Nevuah of Yechezkel, the Bnei Ephraim, the valley of Dura. Well, on that fateful death march, my grandfather also came to his interpretation. As the marchers of our nation marched through the dark nights, road paths littered with graves, barely conscious, before my eyes stood the Navi Yechezkel, marching in the valley of the dry bones, asking the mournful question, Hasichyena ha'atzamois ha'eleh, will these bones come to life? But just like in the Nevuah of Yechezkel, these bones did come to life. We look at Klal Yisrael today. The Jewish people have had somewhat of a Tchias HaMesim. The Rebbeinu Shalom showered Klal Yisrael with the Tal Techiyah, with the Tal HaTorah, and there's been a great renaissance and revival of Torah all over the world. But we still await the great Tchias HaMesim, the great revival of Klal Yisrael. May we be zoiche to see it b'mher v'yameinu, b'haramas karen HaTorah, b'haramas karen Yisrael, b'bi'as koel tzedek, b'mher v'yameinu. Amen.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.